Janet, let's get a divorce. The words rang out with a cruel, almost childlike glee, like a boy who had finally gotten his hands on a long-coveted toy. The sound pierced deep into my ears, down to the very core of my nerves. The voice belonged to my husband, Tom. He looked unnervingly comfortable in his black suit, his face bright and untroubled, showing not a trace of grief. Beside him stood his sister Hilary, draped in a jet-black dress as though it were the robe of a victorious goddess. She wore a flawless, triumphant smile, making no effort to hide it anymore. Her red lips curled upward, and her eyes, darkened with thick eyeliner, glared at me as though I were filth. We were standing at the very place where my father-in-law, Paul, had just been laid to rest. The lilies adorning the altar filled the air with their fragrance, mingling heavily with the stench of death. Around us, hushed sobs and murmured remembrances of the deceased could still be heard. And yet, in this solemn silence, my husband had thrown his words like a blade, heartless, cold, and utterly out of place. I lifted my face slowly, meeting Tom's gaze head-on. Through my tear-blurred vision, his expression stood out in eerie clarity, as if caught in slow motion. It was not the face of the man I had once loved and shared my life with. Gone was the husband who had worried over his father's illness, who had laughed and told me my cooking was the best in the world. In his place stood a stranger, filled with insatiable greed and arrogance so vile it denied the humanity of anyone around him. Tom went on, speaking louder than necessary, as though he wanted the entire room to hear. With each word, he desecrated this sacred place. Dad's estate, once Hilary and I combine our shares, comes to $3.2 million. Which means, Janet, your role as my personal ATM is over. You've served your purpose. ATM. Those 3 letters slashed through my heart like an icy blade, gouging deeper and twisting mercilessly without pause or pity. I felt the blood drain from my body, the warmth seeping out of my fingertips. To him, I had never been a partner, never a wife, just a soulless machine for cash withdrawals. Did he have any idea how hard I had worked as sales director at a medical equipment company? How many sleepless nights I had endured, suffocating under pressure and loneliness, just to become the company's top performer? The luxury company car he flaunted, boasting it was worthy of my status, a car paid for by my career, did he even remember that? The gifts he showered Hilary with, bought from the money I earned, had he ever thought twice about that betrayal? Just moments earlier, I had been torn apart by the grief of losing my wise and gentle father-in-law. But to Tom, his father's death, their shared memories, even the body still warm in its coffin, these were nothing but stepping stones on the path to fortune. I bit down hard on my lip, holding back the boiling rage clawing at my throat. The taste of iron spread through my mouth. And strangely, the tears that had flowed so freely before were gone. Beneath the storm of grief and fury swirling inside me, I felt something colder, quieter, ignite, a blue flame rising in the depths. A flame of absolute zero, fierce enough to consume all pain and sorrow. And in my heart, I spoke to him. You will regret this, Tom. That $3.2 million will be the very thing that destroys you. His words, I don't need an ATM anymore, landed in the funeral hall like sewage, tainting the air. For a moment, the room fell utterly silent, as if doused in water, then, in the next instant, countless stares of confusion, curiosity, and contempt converged mercilessly on the 3 of us, Tom, Hilary, and me. A distant aunt covered her mouth with her hand and whispered to cousin. Tom's colleagues averted their eyes, visibly uncomfortable. Whatever else they thought, one thing was obvious, I was now seen as the pitiful wife about to be discarded in a bitter inheritance feud. Hilary basked in the shower of stares with a look of ecstasy, leaning in to peer at my face, the corner of her lips curling in triumph. In her eyes danced the ugly joy of a long-nursed jealousy finally satisfied. Tom wrapped an arm around her shoulder, puffing out his chest like some petty king gloating over his conquest. But the scene they had imagined, the crying, broken wife, clawing at them in fury, was nowhere to be found. In my mind, I could hear it clearly, the calm yet powerful voice of my father-in-law, spoken just weeks before his death as he held my hand in his hospital bed. Janet, once I'm gone, Tom will show his true colors. That weakness lives in him. But when it happens, don't be afraid. Walk the path you believe in. That time had come. Nothing more, nothing less. And my heart was calm, eerily calm, like the sea before a storm. Grief and anger sank to the depths, leaving only a surface of glacial clarity. I raised my head, locking my eyes on Tom's. Then, in the steadiest, most unshakable voice I could muster, I spoke. Yes, Tom. I understand perfectly. I'll take your words to heart. My unexpected composure seemed to throw him off. A flicker of unease crossed his face as his carefully scripted scenario began to crumble. What's with that attitude? This is a sacred place, meant to honor your father. Discussions of inheritance, or our personal disputes, have no place here. Don't you think a conversation like this should be held later, in the proper place, with the proper people involved? The proper people. Hillary's suspicious voice cut through, catching the barbed edge in my words. Among the relatives, whispers spread like ripples across water. What does she mean? Is she talking about bringing in lawyers? I decided there was no point in exchanging any more words with them, so I turned to the gathered relatives and offered my greeting. Thank you all so much for taking time out of your busy lives to come here today in honor of my late father-in-law. Please excuse me, I'll be stepping away for a while. It was the perfect farewell, an unimpeachable gesture of respect as a daughter-in-law. It was also my final duty to Paul. I gave Tom and Hillary not so much as a glance. With my back straight and my steps steady, I left the hall. As I walked toward the light spilling through the exit, step by step, I spoke silently to Paul in my heart. Please watch me. With the sort of truth you entrusted to me, I will defend your honor and my dignity. That was my vow. But behind me, the vile voices would not cease. Look at her run away, Tom sneered. What a pathetic loser, Hillary spat. And the whispers of the relatives, thick with curiosity and contempt, chased after me like a wave. Only a few more steps to the light of the doorway. Then my feet stopped cold. The plan had been to walk away, to handle everything later through lawyers. That was the safe, calculated path. But here they were, mocking me in this sacred place, where Paul rested. They laughed at me, Paul's beloved daughter-in-law, at his very funeral. It was blasphemy against him. So I changed my plan. It would end here. This was not an impulse. It was the moment when every memory I carried fused into one spear of unshakable resolve. Why did I have to go this far? In that moment, I reaffirmed my reason by summoning every memory back to life. Especially the memory of that decisive betrayal, the one that solidified my resolve beyond all doubt. Beyond the sweet, poisonous memories with Tom lay the truth. I remembered the night I secured a crucial contract for my company. Tom had raised a glass of champagne and told me, "You're the greatest queen in the world." He had roasted lamb with herbs I loved, smiling shyly as he confessed he had practiced the recipe just for me. I wanted to believe that smile was real. That night, I truly thought, marrying this man was the best decision of my life. But that warm memory was mercilessly overwritten by another. Even as champagne bubbles sparkled, Tom's eyes gleamed with childlike excitement, not for me, but for an idea. He suggested using my status as top sales director to demand a company upgrade for our car. You earned it, didn't you? It's your right. Besides, a fine car elevates my status as your husband, too. At the time, it was just a small sting in my chest. But it was the first crack, a warning of the fissure that would soon grow into something that consumed our marriage. From the very start, this marriage had been born from my vulnerability. I had lost my first husband in a sudden accident. Tom had slipped in, exploiting my fragile heart. He never lifted a finger in the household. He plundered my savings without hesitation. As your husband, isn't it only natural I should look the part of a man with social standing? He would say before splurging on expensive watches and clothes. But what I found most unforgivable was that even the care of his bedridden father was thrust entirely onto me, with the words, "You're better at that sort of thing." He was nothing more than a parasite, feeding off my love, my devotion, and my wealth as if they were his rightful entitlements. And then came the day of betrayal I would never forget. Paul was weakening by the day. His appetite was fading, his smile dimming. It tore at my heart to watch him. I wanted desperately to give him something bright to hold on to. So I arranged a dinner at our home with an elderly gentleman, a client whose trust was vital to the company's future. I thought that in the warmth of our family dining table, rather than a sterile office, the conversation would flow naturally. I'll take care of everything. We'll secure your success at work, and give Dad peace of mind at the same time. Tom said this as he wrapped an arm around my shoulder, making a firm, confident promise. I had believed him. Foolishly. That afternoon, I poured my heart into the meal. I filled the dining room with Paul's favorite seasonal flowers. All of it was for family and for my career's most important guest. But that hope was crushed by bottomless malice. The appointed time came and went. Tom never showed. My calls went unanswered, each one dropping into voicemail. Cold sweat poured down my back as I greeted the client alone. With my heart ready to burst, I patched together excuses about a sudden emergency and did my best to carry the dinner conversation by myself. And then, it happened. The front door slammed open with a violent crack, as though the lock had been broken. Tom stumbled in, reeking of alcohol and cheap perfume, his arms slung across Hillary's shoulders. The stench of cheap perfume and alcohol trampled over the delicate aroma of the meal I had prepared. "Hey, Janet. We got company? Perfect. Let's drink together." Tom shouted in a slurred voice, while Hillary let out a throaty laugh, savoring my despair as if it were the finest form of entertainment. The elderly client gave me a cold look, somewhere between disdain and pity, and left without a single word. In my ears, I could almost hear the shattering sound of glass, the sound of the career and trust I had spent years building being crushed to pieces. That humiliation would remain branded into me forever, like a burn that would never fade. That night, when I confronted Tom with a trembling voice, he collapsed onto the floor, his face a mess of alcohol and tears. "The more successful you become, the more miserable I feel. Standing next to your brilliance, I'm nothing but an accessory. Can't you, just once, think about how lonely that makes me feel?" With disturbing ease, he twisted his own jealousy and betrayal into something he blamed on my success. Why hadn't I ended things right then? The only reason my heart didn't completely break was because of the unshakable trust I had built with my father-in-law. There had been a decisive moment that forged that trust. It was when Tom had tried to impersonate me and take illegal kickbacks from one of our company's clients. When I discovered it, I felt the blood drain from my body. But instead of hiding it, I went directly to Paul, confessed everything, and offered a heartfelt apology. Tom had shouted, "If you stay quiet, no one will ever know. You'll ruin your own career too." But I only shook my head. "This is your crime, but also my responsibility, for failing to keep watch over you." Paul had said nothing then, he only nodded deeply, then immediately contacted his old friend, a lawyer, to resolve the matter discreetly and perfectly before it could escalate. Later, he called me into his study and said quietly, "Janet, your honesty saved me. You're strong because you don't run from your mistakes." Then he looked me straight in the eye and added, "You are my true daughter." That was the moment he made his grim decision, to protect me, even if it meant cutting off his own son. And because of that, I could never abandon him. After the client had stormed out that night, Paul went straight to Tom's room. I heard his frail voice, full of anguish, trying to scold his son. But it was quickly drowned out by Tom's mocking laughter and his cold dismissal. "It's just a marital spat, Dad. It's not your business." When Paul returned to his study, his shoulders were slumped, not just from illness, but from the crushing despair of a father who couldn't even correct his own son. Seeing him like that, I couldn't choose divorce. If I left, the stress would snuff out the last fragile flame of his life. I had to protect him from his own son's poison. Then, one autumn day, when his health had already begun to decline, I overheard him speaking on the phone in his study. His voice was tighter, more strained, than I had ever heard before. "Yes. I need you to investigate my son. Thoroughly. Especially his relationship with Hillary. I don't care what it costs. His voice carried both the anguish of a father and the steely resolve of a man who would not allow evil to prevail. Not long after, his health worsened sharply and he was admitted to the hospital. In the faint antiseptic air of his hospital room, he made a request of me in a thin, weary voice. "Janet. I need you to go back to the house. Do you remember the little gold key I entrusted to you? Use it to open the locked drawer of my desk. Bring me what's inside, don't let anyone see." I nodded and hurried home. When I slowly opened the door to Paul's study, the air inside felt frozen in time since that day, filled with a stillness almost sacred. I remembered how, whenever I fled there wounded by Tom's cruel words, Paul would always first knock on his son's door. But what came back through the door was only Tom's thoughtless replies and mocking laughter. He would return to the study with a long sigh and sit quietly beside me, rubbing my back as he murmured, "Storms always pass, Janet." His shoulders, carrying his son's sins as though they were his own, always looked so unbearably heavy. Now, knowing I might never again feel the warmth of that comfort, my chest ached. I slipped the small gold key he had entrusted to me into the locked drawer at the back of his large mahogany desk. Inside lay a single object, a thick, leather-bound diary. When I brought it back to the hospital, Paul pointed weakly to a heavy envelope on his bedside table. The seal bore the mark of a private investigator. "When I'm gone, Tom will show his true, ugly nature. To protect yourself, there are things you must know. Think of this as my final testament to you." He pressed the investigator's report and the diary into my hands. "Follow your sense of justice. Do what you believe is right." That was the last promise I ever made with the wise, kind, and unshakably strong man who had become a second father to me. On the way back from the hospital, I parked in an empty corner of a quiet park and opened the two items with trembling hands. The report contained damning photographs of Tom and Hillary, kissing passionately in a luxury hotel lounge. And in the diary, page after page revealed Paul's tortured account of how Hillary's mother, his second wife, had fostered Tom's corruption, shaping them both into co-conspirators. Tom's spoiled nature was my fault, born of my softness toward his mother, my late wife. But my second wife, Hillary's mother, did not correct it, she exploited it skillfully. The first entry described an incident soon after she entered their home. When Tom broke another boy's toy, I scolded him. But my wife wept, crying, "Don't bully him. If the toy is broken, we can buy him a better one." She shielded Tom, and turned her anger against me. From that day on, I felt Tom began to look at me with nothing but contempt. The diary went on to describe how his second wife had carefully molded her own daughter, Hillary, into Tom's accomplice. She taught Hillary, "Tom's word is absolute," while whispering to Tom, "Hillary exists for you, do whatever you please with her." In that warped bond of master and servant, the two of them began to share an entitled sense of privilege. The diary ended with Paul's most painful confession of regret. "Perhaps I never truly loved my second wife. What I loved was the way she blindly affirmed Tom. It reminded me of my first wife, in her youth. When Tom begged for something, his eyes mirrored hers, my late wife's. And when he looked at me that way, I could never say no. I was defeated by both my wives, and in doing so, I abandoned my greatest duty, raising my son properly. How foolish I was. The diary, filled with truth, and the damning photographs were cruel revelations. But strangely, I did not cry. Instead, what settled in me was not hatred but a kind of pity, and alongside it, a quiet resolve, burning like a blue flame. I would end this chain of mistakes, along with Paul's regrets. That very day, I contacted our family lawyer, Mr. Anderson, and arranged for every legal preparation to be completed flawlessly. The sword of truth Paul had entrusted to me at the cost of his life, now was the time to draw it. My steps, halted at the doorway, turned back. Then, in a voice as cold as ice yet carrying through the entire hall, I spoke. "Tom. Hillary. I understand your vile little plan perfectly. So then, regarding this inheritance, I think it best that an expert explain it clearly to everyone here." From my handbag, I took out my phone and called Mr. Anderson, exactly as we had arranged. Switching to speaker mode, his calm baritone voice filled the hushed hall. Hello, Anderson Law Offices. Mr. Anderson, it's me, Janet. Yes, just as Paul warned, it has come to pass. Please proceed. Tom and Hillary exchanged smug smiles. They thought I was making one last pitiful attempt to claw for a share of the inheritance. That shallow arrogance was written all over their faces. But Anderson's voice continued in solemn tones, addressing all present. First, regarding the supposed total inheritance of $3.2 million. Those assets were already seized by multiple banks as collateral for the massive debts incurred in Mr. Paul Smith's failed clean energy venture in Europe. Not a single cent can be withdrawn. As for the estate that Mr. Paul Smith was free to dispose of personally, it amounts to $990,000. What? That's impossible. There's no way Dad failed in business. Tom's shrill, foolish cry rang out. The color drained from Hillary's face. Some of the relatives, who had been clinging to them obsequiously, quickly changed their expressions and began edging away. The air in the room was visibly shifting. Lawyer Anderson went on, his words merciless. Furthermore, Mr. Smith commissioned a private investigation during his lifetime. Based on their findings, and corroborated by our own review, we can legally confirm Mr. Tom Smith's long-standing inappropriate relationship with his sister-in-law, Ms. Hillary Piper, as well as the unlawful exploitation of Mrs. Janet Smith's personal assets. The moment those words were spoken, the atmosphere froze. All whispers ceased. Every eye turned to Tom and Hillary, stabbing at them with a mixture of shock and disgust. I can't believe it. So that's why they were always so close. It's monstrous, against every human decency, voices murmured openly now. It states, to my son Tom, and to my stepdaughter Hillary, for their immoral conduct and the pain they inflicted upon the virtuous Janet, I grant no rights of inheritance. The remaining $990,000 shall be given in its entirety to my daughter-in-law Janet, as compensation. Then Lawyer Anderson delivered the final blow. Additionally, all real estate properties, including this very home, have already been lawfully transferred into Mrs. Janet Smith's name. Therefore, as of this day, Mr. Tom Smith and Ms. Hillary Piper are trespassers in this residence. Before the stunned pair, I spoke, my voice sharp and calm. What's wrong, Tom? The ATM you said you no longer needed? It isn't here anymore. All that's left before you is the empty balance your foolish scheme has brought you. At that, Tom howled like an animal. Lies. All of it. You tricked my father, you made him rewrite his will. Hillary lunged at me, her voice shrieking. Yes. You conniving thief. You bewitched father. He loved us, if it weren't for you. But no one rushed to their defense. Instead, one of the uncles, his voice heavy with long-suppressed anger, spat out the words. Shame on you, Tom. Don't you see? Paul knew everything you did. He carried that knowledge with him into the next world. I looked down upon their disgrace with eyes of ice. Then, in a voice that carried to every corner of the hall, I struck the final blow. It wasn't me who destroyed you. It was your own bottomless greed. What Paul entrusted to me was never money. It was something a person must never lose, pride. You remember what he always said, don't you? True wealth isn't gold or silver. It lives only in honesty, though, I suppose that's something you'll never understand. My words were the last hammer blow, shattering the glittering dream Tom and Hillary had built in their minds. Months after that day, Tom, ruined and penniless, begged for a meeting through his lawyer. To bring this nightmare to its final close, I agreed to see him once. We met on a bench in a small park, beside the cemetery where Paul now rested. When Tom appeared, he was wearing cheap work clothes that didn't fit, his body gaunt and wasted. Gone were the expensive watches and arrogant airs, before me stood only a broken man. A few steps away, he collapsed to his knees, pressing his forehead against the asphalt. Janet. I'm so sorry. Please, give me one more chance. I was wrong about everything. But his tears were not born of repentance. They were the tears of a man desperate to escape his misery, nothing more than self-pity. I rose slowly and faced him. To forgive you as my husband. That will never happen, not for as long as I live. The years you stole from me, the dignity you stripped away, they will never return. His shoulders shook with sobs. I continued. But as a man, you can still start again. Live in such a way that your father, watching from heaven, could proudly say, "That is my son." That is the only atonement left to you, but know this, my path will never again cross yours. The rejection was absolute. Yet the moment I spoke Paul's name, Tom's sobs abruptly ceased. With his head still bowed, after a long silence, he whispered in a trembling voice, "I really am sorry." And for the first time, I thought I heard in his voice not self-pity, but genuine regret. I turned my back on him and walked alone toward the sunlit hill where Paul slept. I hadn't forgiven him. I never would. But hearing those final words, I felt the heavy chain of hatred that had bound me for so long begin to loosen. Defeating an enemy isn't the only form of strength. To acknowledge the inescapable weakness in people, and still believe in the possibility of renewal beyond it. That, perhaps, was Paul's last lesson to me. Today, I live in a small apartment in the city, beginning anew. The great house Paul left behind carried too many painful memories for me to live there alone. Instead, I donated it in full to the children's charity he had supported so passionately. I knew in my heart that filling that home with children's laughter was what he would have truly wanted. What Paul left me was not physical wealth. It was the strength to endure any hardship, and the pride of knowing how wealth should be used. My work is my pride. And I know Paul would say, wealth is meant to be used like this. Outside my window, the sky stretches endlessly blue. A single white contrail cuts straight toward the future, like Paul himself, smiling down at me, saying, "That's the way." My life begins again, here and now.